turn to introduce Sam Dubberley, who is joining us tonight from Amnesty International. Sam works for the Evidence Lab, which is a group of technologists and investigators. They use open source as their main way to disclose what is happening around the world. His team has been doing some incredible work, and they have been recently posting content and verifying UGC from all over the world, as well as working on the likes of Syria and Iraq. He's going to tell us about his latest investigation. One of his latest investigations called Smokescreen. Sorry, I got distracted. And with this, I pass to Sam.
Thanks, Matteo, and thanks for having me join Hacks Hackers today. What I wanted to talk about was a project we worked on at Amnesty in October, starting October last year, and this was published in March. We actually published the week of the shutdown, the lockdown started, so maybe didn't have the impact we'd hoped it had. Unlike Conversation, it seems, which was great. But I want to talk you through a little bit through this platform and why we built it. I put a bit.ly link to the platform on the screen there for those of you interested. I'm sure Matteo put in the chat for everyone. So back in October and November of last year, there were mass protests all around the world, as I'm sure everybody here knows. But there was a lot also in Iraq. And we were, as Amnesty, we monitor all these protests everywhere as they occur and as they happen. But something interesting happened in Baghdad, where we suddenly started getting these videos which were showing deaths in one of the most gruesome manners I've ever seen. And somebody who's worked 10 years in broadcast newsrooms and now works for Amnesty International, I've seen most of the international conflicts since 2002. And this was something very special. And we worked quite hard and quite quickly to verify and geolocate these videos to Baghdad. It started off with one video of one death, which we thought, it looked very unusual. There was a body lying on the ground with smoke coming out of their skull. We thought that could just be, something unusual, something accidental even. But actually, we started looking more carefully and identified around 20 deaths in this way. And as any good non-governmental organization would do, what we did was we put out a press release. And as we always do, a good press release came out, and we kind of did our investigation, and we saw that there was, we identified some of the tear gas canisters in the previous slide. You saw an Iranian canister and you saw a Serbian canister. Now, the interesting thing about these canisters was that the usual tear gas canister weighs around 25 grams. And after we identified the canisters, we were able to notice that these canisters actually weigh around 250 grams, so 10 times heavier than a usual tear gas canister, which already, if it hits somebody in the skull, has a great risk of killing them. These at 250 grams were actually embedding in the skulls. So we put out our press release as usual, and this got quite a lot of pickup in the international media. But we decided we needed to do something more, because we wanted to show that there was a pattern going on here by the Iraqi security forces, and that they were deliberately using these heavy grenades to kill and to maim protesters in Baghdad. So we partnered with a architects firm, a research firm based out of New York City called Situ Research, S-E-T-U Research, with whom we've worked before. They've done a lot of work in the occupied Palestinian territories, for instance. They've done a lot of work in Myanmar. And this organization seemed like the perfect partner with which to build Smokescreen, because what we really wanted to do was to understand the weapons in relation to the urban space in which they were being deployed. There were issues around the distance between where the protests were and where the barricades were in Baghdad around Tahrir Square, and we wanted to really look at the performance of the weapon in that space to actually show that there was a deliberate targeting, and the use of these grades, these 250-gram grades, was going to actually kill. So we faced two challenges. I wanted to talk through two of those challenges. Something that's very close to my heart, because I've done a lot of work on it, is the traumatic impact of seeing such videos. And it was a big discussion as we were building this platform, was how do you show the lethality of a 250-gram grenade without showing the photos and videos that we discovered online. Already, you know, for me, as someone with experience of looking at this, we knew that it deeply impacted me. So how would that impact our audience? And if we actually showed these videos to the audience, what would the reaction of the audience be? Would it actually put people off engaging with the platform, which we thought it would? Already we'd used CAT scans that we got from Baghdad hospitals in our press release, and that already got some pushback. So what we decided to do was actually to concentrate very much on the performance of the grenades and the weapons in that space, to show, basically, as you can see in this video here, how fast they move and how heavy they are. And then we kind of went out and built this out and actually looked at the description of the grenades, and then used ballistic gel modeling and to show how these grenades would actually work on ballistic gel, which somewhat represents the human body. Obviously, it's very hard to actually fully represent the human body. It's made of a bone, of muscle, of liquid, of water, and here we just have gel. But this is, you know, a well-known modeling technique to show the efficacy of a munition. And in this case, it shows also later on in the actual platform how that performs against a shotgun cartridge, for example. And it shows that actually the depth of penetration is deeper with these grenades compared to, for instance, a shotgun cartridge. So that was the first challenge we had. We really wanted to actually make sure we could actually show off the performance of the weapon without actually terrorizing and traumatizing our audience. The challenge too was how to actually convey the performance characteristics in the public space and the environment they were in. There was a very particular corridor in Baghdad from the Cumhuriyet Bridge down to Tahrir Square, and the famous Turkish restaurant building, and this is where all the protests were happening. So what we did was we started with the 30-centimeter high resolution satellite imagery, which we purchased, and used that as a kind of like foundational map for building the whole area out. And this is part of the model, as you can see on the screen here. But having the satellite imagery taken from that time allowed us to actually work out where the barricades were set up by the security forces, but also where the protesters were coming from. So this allowed us to actually build the scene and build the model using landmarks. We then, we probably collected around 60 to 70 videos of the whole scene, many of which didn't get used. And we spent a long time kind of trying to map those into this environment using an open source software tool called Blender. And using Blender allowed us to use motion tracking and the videos to compute the motional micro movements of the videographer. Obviously, you know, all these were amateur videos taken in high pressure situations. So they were very jogging, a lot of movement and sudden movement in that. And we wanted to be able to reflect that within the platform where the videos were embedded. So this was the use of Blender. And you can see how that moves. We were able to actually use those points to track it, and then build those into the software platform to actually situate each of the videos within that model, and then move the video or move the model around the video as we were building the platform. The other big challenge we had was the fact that we wanted to actually create a full scroll throughout the process. If you, and I hope you will, after this talk, go into the platform, you'll see it's a scroll throughout, which allows for a scroll forwards, but it also allows for a scroll backwards. Within the video itself and within HTML5, embedding a video makes it very hard to move backwards, right? There's lots of lagness, lots of jumping backwards and forwards. You lose the rhythm if you try and go backwards in a video. So what we wanted to do was actually deliver a smooth scroll-based experience for the user. So to do that, what we did was we took each and every single video that we embedded in the platform and turned them into clips. Basically, we made it into a sequence of discrete images, what's called a digital flipbook, which would allow like kind of that granular analysis of each frame. And what was important in these videos is in certain frames, you could actually see the canisters moving through the air. And I think you saw that in the first So that solution, I think, was really, really, for Amnesty at least, very innovative, that allowing that kind of scrolling within a platform backwards and forwards to actually allow the user to really experiment with the platform, kind of enjoy the experience for themselves as they were moving through. And then finally, the point is that what we wanted to highlight here was that there was the deliberate nature of the use of the security forces of these grenades, and this can actually be seen by the angle of fire. And it was very important to us to actually show the low angle of fire and to show how that was actually resulting in the deaths of protesters. There's a lot of work being done by human rights organizations into recommendations around how tear gas should be used, but not so much about how it's misused. And what we're able to do then in rebuilding and reconstructing this whole area of Baghdad during these protests of October, November 2019 was to actually really show how these weapons were misused and how that led to the death of over 24 people in a particularly appalling way. So that was a quick run through Smokescreen to try and give an idea of the narrative, but also some of the technology we employed behind it.
Thank you so much, Sam. It was a very detailed presentation. We already have some questions, and one of the questions actually resonates with something that I wanted to ask you, so I'm going to be very egoistic and ask you both. The first question is from Louis Tierney, who says, so much is happening in the world all the time. How does Amnesty prioritize their investigation, and what determines your agenda? And yeah, my question was, why a campaigning organization like Amnesty engage in this kind of storytelling? So if you want to draw on that.
Yeah, sure. So kind of on both. I think looking at the protests of last year kind of answers Louise's question quite nicely. So actually, we don't prioritize, to be honest with you. We're an organization that kind of looks at all of these protests through a human rights lens. So what we hope, of course, is that the protests are happening in the most peaceful way, as they should be allowed, and people's right to protest is being respected. And obviously, we would never then need to comment. I mean, the goal of Amnesty is not to exist, after all, in an ideal world. But there are situations where we feel we really can make a difference, and where we then really go a bit further. And this was one of those situations. I think it was for Amnesty, it was something of a perfect storm. And this kind of goes into your question, Matteo, as well. Where there was an opportunity for an organization like Amnesty to really put the human rights element of this to the fore. We saw news organizations picked up on our work initially and reported on it, but it wasn't so much around the human rights angle. It wasn't so much around there is a major issue here with the way in which protesters are being killed. So this actually allowed us a way in. I mean, Iraq, in many ways, horrible to say it, people don't really, care that much. And actually, during the protests, there was 300, 400 people killed. But doing this investigation into a situation where there's 20, 26 people, I think we have unverified information from doctors, medical workers in Baghdad, that there was about 40 people killed in this way, allowed us to then shine more of a light on what was happening in Iraq in general. And it allowed us to shine more of a light in the fact that 400 people are being killed in normal ways, in inverted commas, by gunfire or beatings or whatever. So actually investing time in an investigation like this in a very noisy world allows us then to take, I think, the story further and to actually expose what's going on in other ways.
Thanks, Sam. There is another question from Drita Shah, who says hello. How much storyboarding in advance do you try to do when it comes to embarking on these projects, and how much is organic as you dig up the research?
This kind of project unfolded in a strange way. I think it was we did the research, and then we found ourselves, at the end of November, in a situation where we realized we wanted to do more and we could do more. It was a very iterative process, and it was one very much a collaboration between us and Situ, and even when I say us and Amnesty, it's between us, as in my team, the evidence lab, which kind of does open source research, verification, traditionally satellite analysis, weapons analysis, but also our Iraq researchers. And I think that's where, you know, somebody like an organization like Amnesty doing this work really makes a difference. It's because we have the people on the ground, and then, well, not on the ground, but we have people who are specialists on Iraq, who have the networks on the ground, who can really dig into it. And everybody, so we brought our kind of open source investigation to the table. The Iraq team brought their Iraq knowledge to the table, and then Situ brought their knowledge of urban areas to the table. And working all of us together on a kind of, we basically had, you know, weekly calls throughout the period, and obviously not being a news organization, we didn't have maybe the same time pressures of a news organization. So we could actually take our time over about a 3-month period to actually build this together. We had the perfect launch date and everything, which obviously wasn't the perfect launch date. But actually doing it that way was really good, which made it a lot more iterative than storyboarding. And the storyboarding that did happen at the start got ripped up by the end of it, to be honest with you.
Okay, thank you. We got one last question. Thank you so much for being so precise with your answer. It's from Stu Matthewson. He says, how did you measure the impact success of the piece? Did it meet your expectations?
I mean, as I kind of alluded to, you know, we had great, I mean, I think we had great impact when we actually put out our press release. We got a lot of news organizations interested. Your news organization, Matteo, was one of the ones who actually did a big piece on it, on this research from the start, which was great. And we, you know, for Amnesty, you know, we had a lot of impact. Actually, the press release we put out on this had as much impact as one of the big 90-page PDF reports that Amnesty does from time to time. Therefore we had great hopes for this when it launched, but unfortunately we launched the last week of March, and you know, the news cycle wasn't very interested in Iraq at the time. That said, you know, while we didn't manage to get any kind of interest from news organizations on that, we had, I think, about 6,000 in the first 3 days. We had something like 6,000 unique hits, and an average of 3.5 to 4 minutes spent on the platform, which I think, you know, that time spent on the platform is really massive. And I think importantly also, we got a lot of interest, not just in the Western world, the Northern European world, but it also meant a lot to people in Iraq themselves. And we got a lot of feedback from the groups on the ground that we work with in Iraq, as to how much it meant that an organization like Amnesty was trying to work on this and bring issues around Iraq to the fore.
Thank you so much, Sam.